you guys all for tuning in again. As most of you probably know at this point, I'm Ravin, CEO of Creedle and host of the AI Adoption Playbook. Today I'm here with David Vainchenker from Mongo. David, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about who you are?
Sure. So, MongoDB. I run internal product, enterprise initiatives, and I'm on the hook for internal generative AI. So basically all the internal use cases for how we adopt it.
Nice. Yeah, awesome. One of the things that, we usually just like to get kicked off with is just understanding a little bit about what are you guys actually using Gen AI for internally, right? Mongo is obviously very well-known enterprise, like right at the cutting edge of this stuff. You're obviously using it, or your product is like highly relevant to it as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like you guys obviously bring probably a very sophisticated, thoughtful like perspective here. What is actually your approach for figuring out what use cases are actually worth investing in internally?
So, I'll focus on the internal story, obviously, not the external investments that we're making. And I'm sure you've seen all the media and everything around that. Part of framing this is kind of thinking a little bit through like the journey we've taken.
Yeah.
Right. So, not unlike a lot of other shops, we started with the sort of traditional chatbot experience.
Totally makes sense.
Not hooked into any internal data.
Interesting.
Safe approach, right? Like just hook it up to publicly available data. We were literally crawling our own websites at some point.
Wow.
Like just to think about like data availability for AI was a really interesting story.
You wrote the web scrapers to crawl your own? No way. That's wild. Wow.
It's funny when you think about it because it's like almost like you wouldn't think that that's a challenge internally. But in this case, it was.
Wow.
And there was, of course, a lot of data we did have, right? Like we had our docs team, our education teams, there was things that we could use. So we started there, right? And then pretty quickly we recognized that there was a need for some kind of a access control layer, right? So we needed, permission-aware retrieval. Imagine this is where you guys came in.
That was
and candidly we looked at building this ourselves. And we had a lot of starts and stops with that. And in the end, it was just the upkeep necessary and candidly, the hardening that we needed for that
makes sense.
Was just not going to be scalable for us to do ourselves. And so, once we addressed that concern, that kind of took us on that quicker trajectory of like shipping more valuable applications. So those things that can talk to your internal data, right? Permission aware, sensitive content. It kind of broke through or reset some of the trust boundaries for us internally because there was a lot of fear with our leaders. And then I think as we sort of progressed through that, the sort of next stage of that journey was more around, okay, we can have conversational AI, we can talk to internal data and content in a secure way, but can we actually perform intelligent operations, right? Something that has this sort of like cognitive understanding of your business.
Right.
And then this took us down the whole path of graph RAG and all these types of concepts.
Really cool.
So we've done a bunch of investment there. And then now we're in the sort of age of agents.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this is like the present state.
Yeah, 100%. So, all of that makes tons of sense. I think like one of the things that people struggle with a little bit is, and I think you guys did this really well, is like figuring out like, I could probably use AI on like, 80 or 90% of my business to make it more efficient. But like, I can't realistically take my like entire engineering team and put like literally my, all of MongoDB's devs on like building for all of these like thousands of use cases, like literally thousands of employees. So, in practice, this is like a big prioritization effort that you need to figure out, right? How did you guys actually point to, okay, this is the problem that we want you to solve? Like, obviously things like permission-aware retrieval like make sense at the infrastructure layer, but you also need to point those infrastructure investments at like a business problem, right?
Yes, there's a lot of nuance here, right? So on the one hand, truly this is not a plug, but it's reality. Like the thing that Creedle enabled us to do with this concept of a central RAG service was enable a lot of sort of BU-led self ability to just create bots. And so we saw a lot of like plumbing happening there. So
really cool.
One of my favorite examples was a GRC bot that was created. And so like that was very interesting. There's a dev prod bot underway. Like so people can sort of self-help in this context.
100%.
But then when you think about these like larger investments, these sort of enterprise scale, what's the thing we should focus on? This is much harder. So we somewhat naively, right? We made certain investments where we just really from like a security and standards perspective, we just needed to do, right? So we shipped something called MongoGPT, which is like a company-wide ChatGPT experience. Like that was because people were going to ChatGPT, right? Cool. So this is like a shadow IT problem. So we need to be a little bit cognizant of that point. So that was a necessary investment. And so obviously we'd like to keep things in our own data boundary. There was a couple table stakes investments like that.
How did you guys think about because obviously one of the things that you could have done about that is you could have bought ChatGPT Enterprise, right? How do you guys think about the trade-offs between those two problems?
Well, one, a lot of these data models, these enterprise-based solutions, are architecturally still something we're not comfortable with. And so, we could have. Certainly, and there's been a lot of really interesting Perplexity Enterprise, ChatGPT, GPT Enterprise, and all the like. But it was sort of a twofold thing. It was one, just build it. It's on our infra. It's behind our corporate boundary, so we're comfortable. But two, just having, if it's going to be this surface area for the entire company, it gives us additional utility to do things that are very sort of overfit to our needs, very bespoke solutions. And so when you look at the roadmap for that particular product, it's really centered on squeezing out more sort of MongoDB specific optimizations.
100%.
So we can probably spend the entire podcast on that. But to answer your earlier question, so when I think about how we think about these investments. So first it's those table stakes,
100%,
right? And then we started pulling a lot of data from usage patterns and what are people actually doing in something like a MongoGPT. And interestingly, we found that our largest user group was actually engineering.
Wow.
And this was a surprise to us.
Really cool,
right? And so this sort of centered us on what are their use cases, how can we better serve their needs, right? So this sort of changed how we thought about which integrations mattered,
100%.
Which products ultimately mattered.
100%.
So my best advice in these cases is just ship something quickly.
So true.
And then see what people are doing with it.
No, I absolutely love this. I have this framework that I think of how enterprises try and approach this. Basically, most companies either try to take what I call an inductive approach or a deductive approach. And the deductive approach is essentially you ask the CEO, what are the most important business problems today? And then the CEO says, I want to sell more, right? And then the sort of AI team's okay, how do we sell more? And then they kind of try and figure out how to take this technology and apply it to that thing. And then there's the inductive approach of, okay, well, we have smart people. What are our smart people trying to do, right? How do they think that they can actually unlock value out of this thing? And I think because the technology is so new, people still don't really understand it. Even if you do understand it, what you understand today is out of date 2 weeks later, right? Because I think we started Creedle 18 months ago, and now I think we've literally seen 27 new, I think it was 27 at this point after check, 27 new state-of-the-art models, right? So literally almost 1.5 to 2 a month, which is just nuts. So what you believe the models and the technology is capable of today is just immediately out of date, right? And so this inductive approach just empirically seems to be working a lot better of let's get something out there so that people can try things and then, move quickly from that rather than I'm going to solve one problem this year and I can tell exactly what the technology is going to be able to do,
Yeah, I mean, we're not immune to sort of deductive, sort of this go. We have this problem, go solve it. Again, this is actually an issue because even our sort of how we think about the productivity that comes out of these types of systems is also constantly evolving. Right. So we had, the primary metric with something like a MongoGPT was time savings.
Makes sense,
Then we started socializing some of those gains back to our leadership, and their response was, okay, great, but time savings aren't dollars, right? You save people time, they're going to spend more time at the cooler or to check out early, and it's okay, I think I understand the the analogy you're trying to draw there, but you can't just draw a straight line from time savings to dollar savings.
100% true, yeah.
So then, how do you actually translate this business goal into a sort of a product requirement? Right,
totally right.
And we have experimented a little bit with that. I will say that what I have found is that most of the time you really need, if you're going to say something is boosting productivity, you really need a hand raiser to say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to suspend growth in my team because I'm taking that leap of faith that I'm going to get that additional capacity from the systems you're building.
100%.
So it has to translate into real dollar OpEx.
Right.
Or conversely, right, if you don't want to do the sort of OpEx approach, then you have to sign up for something like more quota or something that's more on like that top line basis.
100%.
But there has to be a give there, right? It can't just be like, hey, we're going to accumulate all these like theoretical savings and say that we've, you're saving 3 hours a week, which translates to, multiply by all your employees. You start getting these like astronomical figures.
100%,
that nobody's going to believe.
Right. And then at the end of the day, like you look at the P&L and you're like, wait, where was all of that cost savings? Right. I mean, that makes tons of sense. I think one of the things I thought you guys did really well was like, I remember one of the first use cases that you guys shipped was this like Coach GTM stuff, right? That I think is like public out there on the internet. And I love the way that you thought about like framing the ROI of that as of like, how do we bring this revenue forward, right? Because ultimately, as you said, it's time saved. But where are the places where time saved means like more money, right?
Yeah.
And Coach GTM is actually a really interesting example of that.
Yeah. And for everyone's context, Coach GTM is a technical question responder. So it's trained on all of these sort of like internal technical documentation, libraries and, code bases and everything else that like ultimately, if you think about these sort of more expensive capital T technical resources that have to answer questions on the fly that are coming from customers, that entire support ecosystem can now move faster, and have these things at their fingertips. And then, once you curate that data and then you start to see where the quality of response becomes, and now you have these golden data sets and you can start to even get super creative and build sort of like in-call live prompting. I know everyone's seen these like YouTube videos of people having like interviews with AI. I mean, why can't we do that? Like, why can't our sellers do something similar where they have this sort of like this little booster, getting them through the combo. So
I know
we've seen a lot of excitement around the Coach GTM product.
Tons of usage as well, right?
A ton of usage. But candidly, even that one is difficult to translate into real sort of dollar savings. We can't even really equate it to like shortening of a sales cycle. Honestly, a lot of this sort of telemetry and diagnostics is like it's a big part of the problem. Like if you're tracking like classic like MAU type of stats, but it's hard to like get it down to like a translatable. This is, to your point, the P&L change.
That's actually really interesting to me because like one of the things that I always find odd is like if you look at the LLM space, I feel like, and this is probably unfair, my just like warped perspective, but I feel like 50% of the AI startups that I see are like LLM observability like startups, right? But it's just like very interesting that the observability problem that you actually have is how do I observe the P&L impact of my like investments. I've seen zero AI startups trying to solve that problem, which is completely different to, okay, I've like logged your LLM prompts and outputs for you, which is...
I haven't seen it either. If you do come across it, let me know. But
well, guys, if you're thinking about founders, there's like a buyer right here. So no, that makes tons of sense. It's really, really cool. And then one of the things I am like pretty curious about as well is like, obviously, Mongo is big enterprise. You guys have a lot of different teams thinking about Gen AI simultaneously. Someone like you has to shepherd a lot of different sort of perspectives in the organization, right? I think a lot of the people that we speak to are in a pretty similar like position, and it can be quite difficult, right? You've got people on the security side saying like, "Hey, don't do anything. This is evil," and then you've got people on the business side being like, "We're losing to our competitor because they have whatever GPT." What actually practically does it take to like herd the cats, get alignment, and get stuff done?
There's a natural sort of like herding that happens because you're providing a lot of the sort of baseline tooling necessary for other teams to even develop on top of, right? So you're giving them the frameworks, you're giving them the models, you're centralizing that aspect of it.
Right.
I think philosophically, we haven't, at least we didn't really start as an enterprise that was saying, hey, there's only one team that's going to ship AI. Right. That was like just not the thing we were going to do, right? It was everybody go at it, go solve the problem. You're the experts, right? Like, and go do it. And I do think that like having some form of just knowing what all of those things are and seeing those inputs into the process help you sort of define where you should make your investments. Right.
But when you've got like 5,000 employees, especially 5,000 like largely technical employees who are like pretty AI savvy, like how do you even figure out what everyone's doing? Because they're all doing a bunch of stuff, but it's hard to have 5,000 user interviews, right?
Yeah, I would frame the response a little bit differently, which is that my goal, at least, is not necessarily to be some kind of governance over what everybody is doing, right? Like we continue to encourage the use and adoption of AI and do the things that are very specific to your verticals. And we're just, again, we're enablers.
Awesome.
But there are definitely these situations where either there's, and I hate the word synergy, but there's like a synergy. There's like something really interesting that, throw a plug in, but like our marketing ops team built a great back-end service, and we, rather than recreate some of that work, very sort of like conversational analytics heavy, we're leveraging it, right? So then we use this sort of like multi-agentic framework and orchestration within our apps to then talk to their service.
Really cool.
And so we're investing there, right? We're investing in thinking about how to build custom agents. We're thinking about vertical agents. We're thinking about horizontal platforms. So you guys just announced, obviously, your agent platform. So like we're looking at all of those avenues, but really all of those investments are just inputs into where we should be focused, because otherwise we're just kind of, we're grasping at straws a little bit. We have an opinion, but like sometimes it helps to just see it in action.
Yeah, and that is sort of the beauty in a way of like, as like the inductive approach, like being kind of paired with a little bit of deductiveness here, where you're kind of discovering from the marketing ops team, like, hey, you've got a bunch of like information about how to build this particular service. Like, let's learn from that and let's integrate it into our work. So super interesting. I'm also pretty interested in like, where have you had pushback? Like, what have been the hardest like things to like, get done? And you look like a man with battle scars. Like,
a couple. Look, I do say that. I say that in jest, because I know that everybody's role in this serves a very important purpose.
Super true.
Right. And like this, it's about how it all comes together. Right. And so, we work closely with GRC, with security, with legal. Like we're always trying to think through it.
Right.
I would say that the biggest categories have been, one, if you just think about, again, you said it, very large sort of technical org, a lot of engineers, right? Engineers are traditionally an expensive resource. And so like thinking about how you can increase your coding velocity, right? Code generation, how you can increase the access to information and help all of those sort of ancillary things that engineers do as well, whether it's just sort of crawling through Slack channels to see where there was like some kind of like engineering note or product feature or something needed to follow up, or like going through like repos, or like just like being able to do all of those things quickly. And so where this has been a bit of a challenge, because I don't know to what extent people realize this, but like copyright law
so true,
is complicated and basically ultimately requires a human being to have created the thing for it to be copyrightable. And so like if you are shipping code that is materially AI generated, you are jeopardizing your copyrights, right? Like this might work for certain kinds of code, but not all code. And so like working through that, and then there's cases where you have to sort of detangle the code, right? Like you have like non-shipped software that is in the same repo potentially as, so you start getting into these issues. So that's like one big category.
Plus you have an open core product as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. The next is basically anything where you're introducing a new kind of threat vector, right? And these are typically systems, because you think about like a lot of AI now is like at the connector level, right? It's talking directly to these different SaaS products and systems. And so like, and they are pulling data out in a way that it's like no longer this sort of like traditional data lake ETL process. And so just by virtue of like centralizing information to make it more AI accessible, also means you're giving people a single point of failure or threat. And so there's a lot of work around creating comfort there. So those are really the main ones. I will say that in general, you also highlighted that just the pace of innovation, right? And so candidly, a lot of the most interesting companies are actually newer and smaller and less hardened, right? And, there's this kind of metacognition that like, oh, I'm about to sign up a 15-person company.
Right.
That is like, yeah, they're claiming they have all the type 2s and the pen tests and all that. No two pen tests are equal, by the way. And so you're doing that and you're like, oh man, I'm not sure I'm like fully like comfortable.
Right. So true.
I mean, there's like a lot of angles that slow innovation, unfortunately, but again, for good reason.
100%. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's always interesting to me as well is like business continuity is like so challenging when you're working with, when we started, it was literally just me and Jack, I think, when we had the first meeting with you guys, right? And, if I put myself in your shoes, like, okay, like there's stuff about the startup security side. I think given the background and the amount of experience that Jack and I have on the security perspective, like at least we can give you a little bit of comfort that like we're going to treat this pretty responsibly.
Yeah.
But oh boy, would I have been nervous about like, is this company going to be around, in a year, in 2 years? It's just don't know, like the funding cycles do all sorts of things. Like, startups obviously change direction as well. Like, how do you think about that component, business continuity of working with the startup?
So I think of it across a couple of different dimensions, right? So the first is just, is it part of my stack? And so if it is part of my stack and it's critical, then how can I add in a layer of protection? So this is where we think a lot about abstraction.
Right.
And, that's never perfect, by the way, but like that, there's additional plumbing just to sort of make that work.
Totally makes sense. One of the things I've seen, by the way, that's super interesting about this is that if you look at how enterprises, not just Mongo, but like basically all of our big customers are thinking about this, it is so different to how they thought about clouds, like the cloud migration, right?
Yeah.
In the cloud migration, everybody just went to their cloud provider. They weren't like, how do I get off of AWS?
Right.
And you live the consequences of that today, right? And I think, people are just so much savvier about it today, where they're like, okay, well, I want to bet on like the technology, but I don't necessarily want to like bet my entire house that this like provider is not going to like, raise the price 10x on me in like a year or two.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost, I'm putting that sort of like multiplier of like the price increase to sort of like a ladder point. But like I would even say just on its surface, right? Like, can you get comfortable with a smaller, newer entrant being a fully SaaS solution, right? Like that's already brass tacks, a hard thing to do.
100%,
right?
Yeah.
The company can tell a great story, but like you're ultimately shipping your most sensitive, internally, valuable data out.
100%.
And if they go out of business, then you're sort of, or they get acquired, or what does that now mean for us? It puts you into a little bit of a scramble. And I'll further say, like, candidly, it has happened. Luckily, not in the model where our data was being shipped, but like we've had elements of our stack that were in more of that startup category that have gone out of business.
Wow.
And we just got a end of life notice, and it was like, hey, go sort it out. And we're like,
wow, okay.
Whoa, okay, there goes our roadmap.
Right.
Because not that the product will just fail overnight, but it's not a supported product, which means we have to shift our focus towards now building the capability.
Yep.
And so like this is the nature of the game, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's so intense. I mean, how do you think about like whether the risks are worth it, right?
Well, luckily, I have an army of people that help with the figuring out if the risks are worth it, including the aforementioned, security and GRC teams and legal teams, because each has a little bit of a different flavor of what risk means. Sometimes when the risk is high enough, it becomes an executive discussion.
Wow.
Right? Like this is what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
This is the technology we need to do it.
Right.
These are the risks.
Right.
Like, are we okay with that? Sometimes the answer is no. Right. And like that's the pivot, and we move on, or we sacrifice capabilities, or whatever the case may be. But so like that's a real thing, but it's not a one person decision ultimately on like can we get comfortable? There's a lot of opinions in that.
Totally. Where did you guys wind up on the everyone's calling it like vibe coding now? Like, do you guys have the cursors, the windsurfs? Like, still figuring that out?
I will say that I say that somewhat jokingly, but like first of all, any system where people are taking away like VS Code from engineers. They're just like, oh, my dead body. And stuff like, so like already there's like this, like you mentioned windsurf. I think I'm going to go like switching your IDE is just like not a thing that is like super enticing for a lot of folks. And you do, obviously you want a high degree of buy-in.
Yep.
We use more of like the code suggestion, code complete type of solutions. And mostly because there's like some knobs in there that are necessary for us. But, you know, that's limited in its utility. And, you know, most of the research will tell you that acceptance rates are typically in that 20 to 30%, and they drastically drop as you sort of move up the seniority stack of the engineer. So it's like, okay, so I have junior devs that are hitting complete, you know, tabbing out a bunch of like code suggestions at a much higher rate, 40%, and my staff engineers are doing it at 5%. So it's like, should I actually be super comfortable about that, or should I be a little bit weary of that? You know, so like it's an interesting thing. We have looked at more of that sort of like everything from the virtual suite to the, you know, more advanced sort of like integrated cursors and augments and, you know, you name them. And I will say the jury is out. We are very interested. But at our size and our scale,
100%,
you know, takes us a little bit longer to get comfortable.
That makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think I saw on Reddit literally today, like someone posting about Claude Code trying to nuke their home directory, which is just like kind of bananas. But the thing is, these tools are so popular that they're operating at such scale. If you have a 1 in a million like probability that something bad happens, like it's inevitable, right? When you're operating at that scale. And so, you know, like for you guys, obviously, like I said, a lot of engineers, you have to be really thoughtful about how you apply the stuff.
You do, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that like it's actually turned, you know, it used to be the competitive advantage was that you were large, you had scale, right? But now it's turning into this sort of reverse advantage for the smaller, more nimble companies, the startups that are just, they're full AI anywhere we can tap into it, but they're moving really quickly. You know, there was a great piece on Y Combinator just today. They were talking about like that just distinct advantage. And so like, we know that we have to get there. And other enterprises have figured it out to an extent. Right? Like Google, I think ships something like 25% of their code is AI generated. So like I think there's like there is an avenue to it. You know, we just sort of have to take our path. I will say that part of that also is maybe approaching that from a few different vectors, right? So like I mentioned earlier that our largest persona group in MongoGPT is engineers. So the immediate pivot there was add more models, give them optionality to choose a Claude, to then interact as opposed to whatever the default model is behind the scenes. So like this is where you adjust in a few different areas.
Makes sense. Yeah. It's super interesting. I was thinking about the like rapid speed of launch, and you mentioned Google. Like, we launched this like multi-agent platform today. On the same day, Google launched like some big new model, and 11 Labs also launched a big new model, right? And I saw that. I was like, wow, it's crazy. Like, just a super competitive day to do a launch. And then I was like, I wonder if that's actually true, or if it's just like every day is super competitive. So then I like looked back at the like last 7 days, and like every single day was like equally competitive. There was like crazy announcements like every day. Claude also launched web search today as well, right? Like literally every single day, like big structural changes in what's possible in the technology. And it's tough as an enterprise, right? To like keep up with that.
Sort of like launching rockets in space. Like there's just so much junk there now that you can't. Like, there's very few approach vectors. And like you're right, but I mean I think the point is it speaks more to the velocity and the volume of things that are happening in general in AI, which is a good story, right? Like that means that the investments you're making are directionally, right? They might be like incomplete or like whatever the case, or stale. Everything's stale within a couple of days in this space. But, you know, I think I would celebrate that more than I would fear it.
100%. And of course, like, you're never going to figure out what the, like, actually right thing is unless you, like, ship the directionally right thing first and then, like, figure it out from there. I will just say shameless plug for myself or for Creedle, really, that we did beat the Google and 11 Labs launches on Product Hunt. So pleased with that. Cool. Okay. And then one last thing that I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit was, when you are thinking about the sort of operational complexity of, you know, getting an enterprise to adopt these things, like, how do you go about deciding between the different options that you have around like building certain stuff in-house, buying stuff from vendors, like doing a combination of the two, working with your existing providers, right? Like you guys are obviously close partners with all of the hyperscalers. The hyperscalers like offer, a gigantic suite of different things in this space. Like, there's just a lot of different options for like who you partner with and how you partner with them. I think it's been very interesting, like watching you guys in particular navigate this through like the MAP program, where you're just working with like such a wide array of different folks. Like, how have you thought about how your partnership strategy more broadly fits into what you guys are trying to do?
The partnership strategy is more geared towards like how do we make sure that we fit in that sort of AI stack story, right? And so like a lot of the attention there is wide. You're casting a wide net because you want to understand like where who are the emergents in sort of like each category and what are the categories, because that is constantly changing. Right. And then ultimately like where does MongoDB fit in that story?
Totally makes sense.
And the more you're becoming a part of those conversations, the more you conversely they see you as being part of the conversation. So that's just a necessary part of all of this. But if I were to like extrapolate that question a little bit into like how do we choose, like who we procure or things like that for our internal use, I will admit that like, and it's probably going to be common in many different areas, but like the verticals are easier, right? Because there's, they're existing in your sort of like, they're already procured, right? Like you're sort of, these become bolt-ons, or in some cases they just give it to you. But then there's like, it's coming, the renewal, for it. So what ends up happening is that there's this like path of least resistance situation that you align more towards the verticals. But then if you try to be somewhat like forward-looking, or see around the bend of where the issues are going to come up, you realize that like really the most complex challenges are not those that are happening within the context of a single tool. Right. So like Salesforce has Agent obviously Force, their big story around Agent Force. There's a lot of like different vertical AI situations that are happening. But when I have to orchestrate something across multiple different systems, and when I actually like look at the map out the sort of human process, they don't happen in that one place either. So like, how can I expect the system, the agent, to do that, right?
That's so true.
And then inevitably it becomes this like reverse thing where the verticals are then just trying to become horizontal. Right. So then now they're doing all these calls out. So it's and then do you sort of like, how confident are you in that, right? Because now you're sort of like one layer removed. So it's difficult. The way philosophically we've thought about it is we are trying to invest in the horizontal just to get ahead of the needs. But we'll take advantage of the verticals where they are, right? And so if something is like fully contained, like in like, let's say the Salesforce ecosystem, we're absolutely going to just build an agentic workflow there. And it, has other advantages, right? Like you can, because it knows its own concepts, right, and its own architecture. Then like you can do things that are a bit more deterministic. So we often talk about probabilistic versus deterministic, and so like you can do those things. But I truly think it's going to be this like sort of a big adoption curve around vertical first, and then people are going to get stalled by the same problems, and the verticals start turning into horizontals, and then you're going to have the more established horizontals, right. So I think candidly, what you guys are doing is right, because you're down at that sort of like source permissioning level, so I might as well start there and build up.
So one of the things that I hear quite a lot from customers is like thinking about budgets, right? Because all of these providers, whether it's Salesforce, your CRM, your customer support platform, your work apps, your Office suite, that kind of thing, like they're all trying to sell you the AI extension, right? Your task management software is also trying to sell you the AI extension. Like figuring out from a budgeting perspective, like, where does it actually make sense for us to spend our money? Like, how have you guys approached that?
That has been very hard.
Right.
Part of the reason why it's hard, really, is because there's no such thing as an AI budget. Like, like the category wasn't. We didn't. Who had that? Right. Very few, I'm sure. And budgets become this like 1 year, 3 year, 5 year planning cycles, and so it's actually a net new spend category. Right. And all of the players who are like existing in your ecosystem, right? these are add-ons.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? Like
Absolutely.
they're making those investments to stay relevant, but also to charge you more
exactly.
to make more revenue. And so what ends up happening is then you start turning in the conversation. And again, now we get post ZERP era, right?
Right.
So like money isn't cheap anymore. Everyone philosophically already, it was almost like the perfect petri dish, because like everybody went from, high growth, doesn't matter, throw money at the problem, to like, hey, let's become more like, let's expand our margins, let's become more profitable, whatever, those types of logic thoughts. And so like, it became this petri dish already for that.
Yeah.
And then now you sort of bring in this whole new expense category.
100%.
And so immediately people's minds go towards some level of efficiency. Now, whether that is like OpEx reduction, flattening the hiring curve, headcount reduction in general, like as far as headcount, like eliminating certain kinds of vertical functions that are like, could be very like scalable or automatable, or eliminating things in your tech stack. Right. Which again, this is where they almost have to do it to survive.
Yep.
But like, then to your point, it's these nuggets of capabilities that are now emerging.
Right.
Just makes the stack even more complicated. And so it's like, oh, great, like Workato ships a thing, right? Zoom ships a thing, like Salesforce ships it. Like they become, especially as you do a lot of this like BU level investment, they become now ingrained in your work process. And so it's like, now I can't even get rid of them.
Yeah.
So then you lose that edge of saying, okay, AI will allow me to have less tools because it can consolidate around solutions. In reality, you can't.
Right.
And so it's pretty challenging. And I will say that like where I've seen the most momentum has really been more on just like, how can we do more with the people we have?
Yeah.
How can we become more efficient, more productive?
Right.
And even that is like, are you just keeping serve?
Yep.
Right. Because everybody else is doing the same. So like, are you just keeping serve, or is this like actually like some competitive advantage for you? You're moving faster, you're closing deals faster, you're, shutting down tickets quicker. Like, is it just par or par for the course, or like, are you doing something unique?
Yeah, so true. It reminds me a lot of the like AI like SDR category. So the bunch of companies that basically the promise is essentially a promise of free money. We're going to give you an AI that's going to cold outbound every conceivable lead for your business. And it's AI, so they'll work 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, and they'll just message
no bathroom breaks.
Right, no bathroom breaks. And you're going to be in every single person's inbox, which sounds great until you realize, well, everybody's doing that, right? And now the inbox itself is like a meaningless place to be, especially with like an AI generated message. It's just so crowded in there that there's no attention in that place anymore. And so, yeah, I think what you're saying is exactly right. Like, you can't just do the things that everybody else is doing, because there's like actually no way to like drive the business forward there. I mean, maybe it gives you a bit of beta on like improving the basic stuff, but actually you do need to figure out how you're going to innovate, right? And how this is actually going to be valuable for your business.
You're right. Those are sort of like virtual employee type roles are changing the landscape. But even when I think about internal process, right? Like we, in our sort of like internal demand tracker, like something that often comes up is some form of like content creation, document creation. How do I have something that automatically creates like a business value case, or like like these artifacts are like an e-staff memo, and it's fascinating because the counter argument is that, are we moving into a world where we don't even need that?
Interesting.
Right? Like, am I trying to replace a process that is outdated?
Yeah.
If I'm sending you a complex, technical brief, at the end of the day, you're probably just going to like AI summarize. We're scheduling meetings, and like both of our like AI assistants like, you just like it is the way of working shifting, right? And are we moving to the right target? And so there's a lot of like process reimagining that we're also in the midst of doing. Right. But again, a lot of that is you just don't know until you start putting these things out there. So it's a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah, it makes tons of sense. Okay, last question, which is the same question for everyone. AGI skeptic or AGI bull, and what year will AI replace your job?
That's a great question. I believe that the best use of AI is the sort of augmented use case, not the replace use case.
Right.
You know, I think of like the Iron Man analogy and the Jarvis suit. And so like calculators didn't replace accountants. It
Definitely
just allowed them to have more clients and more billable hours. Like, so like, I think that there is obviously get on the train, right? Like use these tools, learn these tools, get curious about these systems and the advancements. And you don't have to be an expert by any means, but like you should be like just aware, and then really think that the best solutions, especially the ones that we've been building, are still human in the loop, right? Like they are. But you know, how do we focus them on the higher value activities versus the lower tail, lower order activities? That's like sort of like the main thesis of everything we do.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. You know, I've always thought that the whole AGI is going to replace all of our jobs thing was like kind of insane, actually. My framing for this has always basically been like, look, when you make it like way easier to do something, you don't necessarily mean that you get less of it, right? Like, think about how hard it was to create software like 20 years ago, right? We didn't have any of the tools that we have today. We didn't have, you know, AWS really. We didn't have GitHub. We didn't have like VS Code, right? All of these things that, you know, MongoDB, right? Like if you're building an application, you don't have that ready set of tools to go, and so you had to build all of that yourself, and you know it was hard and expensive, right? And gradually as that ecosystem got better, like, you know, the experience of being a software engineer in a sense got easier, right? But obviously that has done that has not reduced the demand for software engineers, right? It's in fact exploded the number of software engineers, because what changed was the amount of value those software engineers could create, right? And that actually turned out to be much more important. And I think that's going to be true very much with AI as well, where the beautiful thing about AI is that it does like explode the amount of value that like a human can create, right? And so the demand for human creativity, humans, basically everything that does make us human, I strongly suspect will be amplified, if anything, by the technology.
There'll be some sort of natural like attrition effect. More so, I think, in the sense of like when I flip on FSD on my car, like I kind of get a little bit like lazy and then forget how to drive. Right? Like there's like a kind of lazy is the wrong framing, but my point is like when you're without that sort of natural repetition of the 100%. Thing, the skill becomes less sharpened, right? Like I barely write anything anymore. Think about that, right? Like I, you know, my kids are doing their homework assignments, and I'm sort of like, at some point, am I going to know how to yield a pen? I don't know, right? But do I need to? Like this is part of that evolution story. Like product management, you should just be orating your needs and then iterating live and reacting immediately. Like it's just like everything is changing, right?
When I was a kid, I grew up in this little town in between London and Cambridge called Bishop Stortford. It was a very sleepy town, but very cute. And my parents would drive into London like reasonably often. And I love my parents. They are not especially good at reading maps. and they're both like quite anxious people. And so they would like get so stressed out about this like London A to Z map, right? And they'd be like, no, take this turn, no, it's this one, no, you're on the wrong road. And it was invariably like the screaming match. And I would like genuinely dread like these trips to London, because it was just like my parents were gonna like hate each other at the end of the drive, and it was gonna be like a whole pain in the ass. And obviously like that just doesn't, like, it's just like not a problem anymore, right? Like that whole category of like, you need to learn how to read a map because it's an essential life skill, like that has basically dissolved. And I'm not saying that like, you know, reading GPS isn't necessarily trivial all the time, especially in New York where we are. But even so, like the extent to which you need the skill has been almost essentially like completely eliminated. And honestly, it's made my life a lot better, actually.
Yes, right. It's funny. I had a similar story because I, in college, one of my neighbors in college, he often used to tell us about his dad, who was a real estate agent in Phoenix, Arizona, and he would boast about the fact that his dad knew, like, you can tell him any address and he would tell you exactly where it is on the map. And like, talk about like a skill that you no longer need.
Right.
Now, does that mean he's no longer a real estate agent?
Right.
Certainly not. You know, you probably just have like one less Thanksgiving story to boast about. But you know, again, this is where you also apply your skills to different areas and realize like, oh man, like maybe I didn't even realize I had this.
Right.
You know, this cool skill. Like maybe I'm a prompting expert and I had no idea. So like again, it's just it's a bit of an evolution.
Really cool. Okay, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. David, thank you so much for being here.
Cool. Thank you for having me.